Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad to have you with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. As you know, we're right smack dab in the middle of our 6th year-end specials here on the Three Martini Lunch, looking at a whole wide variety of categories. We started this past Thursday with overrated, underrated, most honest political figures. Then on Friday, we did Rising Star and Figure Fading into Oblivion, as well as our people we were most sorry to see go in 2023. Yesterday, we were discussing things like best political theater, worst political theater, and the biggest lie of 2023. And today's categories are best idea, worst idea, and boldest tactic of 2023. So, Jim, what was the best idea of 2023?
Well, Greg, once again, this is a rebuilding year for best ideas. The draft picks did not turn out the way we hoped. Free agent signings. To quote Bill Belichick, we just didn't get it done. Got to focus on next year. But I was able to come up with a best idea. Actually, ironically, it was kind of the consequences of something that occurred in late 2022. And it comes with a couple asterisks. I can't say it's entirely been a positive development, but I think Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, which was finalized in October 2022, had a lot of really interesting dominoes fall as a result of that purchase. Probably most notably the Twitter files, which exposed how much the previous management of Twitter was in touch both with government agencies and all kinds of people who were either just influential or quasi-government agencies who could call up and say, hey, I think these tweets should come down. And Twitter management would say, okay. And that's really running right up to the edge of violating the First Amendment, if it doesn't directly violate the First Amendment. No, the government is not ordering through force of law for certain people's postings to be taken down. Of American citizens, I should note. If you want to take down something that's coming from the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, hey, as far as I'm concerned, foreign government agents don't have any constitutional rights. You can do whatever the heck you want to their tweets. But American citizens, you have a right to be wrong. You have a right to put up there things that are factually untrue because we don't prosecute people for lying. Everybody lies on Twitter and on social media in all kinds of different ways. Sure, that anonymous guy really is 6'4", a former Navy SEAL, and he's got a medical and a law degree. Okay, sure. So I just kind of look at this and I think Elon Musk exposed the degree to which both the previous management of Twitter and kind of this broader culture in a whole bunch of social media companies really didn't see anything wrong with consulting with the government about whose posting should stay up and whose posting should come down, what kind of statements were okay to leave posted up, what kind of statements were not. And that's all completely contrary to the First Amendment. So that was the single most important thing. Unfortunately, Elon Musk has a very bad habit of either retweeting or kind of signing off on or just getting a very big kick out of almost anything that is trolling. He retweeted a map that suggested that the U.S. had 72 bases all around Iran and was just about to invade Iran. That was the map was completely false. The U.S. does not have a lot of air bases in Pakistan. I'd like to think somebody who's as smart as Elon Musk would have recognized something like that. I think Elon just doesn't care. He makes him laugh and he just kind of puts that out there. There was another one where he kind of retweeted something that indicated that Jews had kind of invited anti-Semitism upon themselves. That because of their some liberal Jews' support for either open borders or lenient immigration policies. Well, this is what they get for that in the rampant waves of anti-Semitism going on in the country. And I don't think anyone should be saying, well, you had this coming, or Jews, you deserve this. Elon Musk backtracked from that, but I think he just, he's as impulsive as anybody else on Twitter, X, and retweets that stuff. So I can't say it's all been good, but I do think we have a new level of transparency in the decision-making of what goes on in these companies. And I think that's good. And I think it illuminates the degree to which these companies, not only were they not independent of the government, they didn't want to be independent from the government. They wanted the government to come in and tell them this is okay, this is not, which is just completely contradictory to what the First Amendment is all about.
No, agreed. It's a bit of a roller coaster, but it's trending in the right direction. Taibbi and Schellenberger and Barry Weiss obviously did a good job late last year laying out the completely inappropriate collaboration among the FBI and DHS, as well as the old Twitter regime, and stifling posts related to COVID and the Hunter Biden laptop and all sorts of things like that. So it is more open. He sometimes does get himself in trouble, but there is more transparency. I mean, there are many different images and videos from Israel, for example, from the terrorist attacks, and since then that were blocked or banned or taken down from Facebook and other social media sites. And so it's your choice whether you want to see some of those very difficult pictures and videos. But the fact that they're allowed to exist on there helps people to understand what's actually happening. And so that fact and analysis getting out is critically important to our larger dialogue over a number of different issues. My choice today, Jim, is stateside, and that is the school choice movement. This is a movement that had to really kind of step on the accelerator this year. It definitely got its genesis in the COVID years, where parents saw what their kids were and were not learning, and in many cases they were horrified by it. We saw it play out very closely to us here in Virginia with the critical race theory and the gender identity curriculum and things like that, or at least policies playing out in the schools, and parents not being happy about that. As a result of that, well, let's have parents have more options, because we all remember Terry McAuliffe in Virginia telling parents they had no right to tell the schools what to teach their kids. And so at that point they said, fine, we're going to elect people who want to give parents more say in the schools that their kids go to and what they learn. And so in a number of states, I'm not sure exactly what the total is, but mostly red states, obviously, with both governors and legislatures being controlled by Republicans, they've passed a number of different school choice pieces of legislation, basically giving parents a lot more freedom to choose either different public schools or private schools or religious schools, or in some cases homeschools. And in some of those states, they're also letting the money go with the student. Your money stays with your kid, and that then gives you the opportunity to not only choose the school, but be able to afford it as well. So a big movement in a number of these states. I think Arizona, actually late last year, was the first to pursue it, but there have been many others as well. It's about time we got this option going in a number of places, Jim, because what we learned not only in COVID, but in test results over the years is that what we have been doing isn't working. The unions completely disgraced themselves during the pandemic, and it was time for change.
Excellent selection there, Greg.
All right, Jim, on to our next category for this special edition of the Three Martini Lunch, the worst idea of 2023.
Listeners, you probably figured out that it's not that Greg and I enjoy the worst idea or the bad nominees more than the good nominees, but it just, one, there's a lot more options that we can kind of really sink our teeth into. And when I was contemplating this category, I really had three. And I was like, oh, can I get away? You know, because at first, like, well, can I pick two? I'm like, nah, I really got to mention all three. And I realized that they're all kind of aspects of the same problem. So at the risk of taking one of your nominations and making you scramble at the last second, Greg, I'm going with a three-fer. The worst idea of 2023 was the Biden administration's overall approach to Iran, which we saw both before and after the Hamas attack on Israel. The overall approach to China, going on the spy balloon and the rolling out the red carpet for Xi Jinping in San Francisco later in the year. And the overall approach to Russia, most notably the slow walking of those really important weapon system deliveries to Ukraine. Now, you might say, Jim, those are three, but they're really, in the end, it's the same mentality. The Biden administration is hell-bent on restoring the Iran nuclear deal. It doesn't matter how many times Iran breaks their word. It doesn't matter how many times Iran refuses to cooperate with the UN. Doesn't matter how many times Iran has its proxies attack Americans in the Middle East. It doesn't matter how much Iran supports Hamas. Like, there's nothing they can do that will make the Biden administration say, well, these guys aren't worth reaching a deal with. There's just nothing that will make the Biden administration lose its faith that if they just try hard enough, Iran will be reasonable and reach a deal. It's very similar approach with China. Biden does not want the burgeoning conflict with China to get any worse, which on its paper, at first glance, that sounds reasonable. That means they keep having to dismiss and overlook and hand wave away one Chinese provocation over another. At one point, Biden even kind of dismissed the spy balloon as this silly thing. Look, according to NBC News at the time, it got serious signals interceptions, and it was a real deal. It was not something that was, they're just taking photos that you could have gotten from a satellite. No, this was a real serious attempt to intercept classified or encrypted signals. The equipment on the thing was a real deal. It's also huge, by the way. It's the size of the school buses, they said. And you want to talk about a story that just disappeared. People, And by the fall, it was all about how we're trying to thaw our relations with China. And, Biden kept making more concessions and bending over backwards. And it's just, again, this effort, if we just try hard enough, they will be nice to us again. And then finally on Russia, there's no shortage of hostile rhetoric from Biden on Russia. I would note, though, that Biden came into office talking about how he wanted a stable and predictable relationship. Now, some of us hawks would say, oh, we've always had a stable and predictable relationship. They've always been stable and predictably bad. They have always been attempting to counter us, as Mitt Romney described them, as our preeminent geopolitical foe. If you want to argue China or Iran, okay. I remember having this conversation when we had Joe Lieberman on our program.
Yeah.
Look, one of these guys is the gold, one of these guys gets silver, and one of them gets the bronze, but they're all on the metal platform. But anyway, so the idea of Ukraine would ask for weapons systems, Biden would hem and haw, and initially he'd say, you don't need this. Never mind that the Ukrainians might know better about what they actually need. And then 6 months later, whether it's Patriot missile systems or Abrams tanks or the best named or the best acronym in the military, ATACMS, the long-range missile systems, eventually the U.S. sends them to them, but 6 months to a year to even more than a year after Ukraine asked for them. And the Ukrainians are grateful. At least that's what I experienced on my trip over there earlier this year. But really, you can't begrudge them a little bit of grinding of their teeth saying, this is great, but if we'd had that 6 months ago, maybe the counteroffensive would be going better. So it's, the Biden administration just, it is a man who wants to be liked. It is a man who wants to be a peacemaker. It is a man who was shaped by Vietnam and who also, by the way, oversaw our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and who has learned really no lessons from that.
It's a man who's weak. I mean, it projects from Afghanistan. That emboldened Putin. I think Putin probably deep down probably regrets it at this point. That did not turn out how he likes. But the Chinese are emboldened. The Iranians are emboldened. It's not good. We want to be doing foreign policy from a position of strength, and we're clearly not. And the completely spineless reaction to the spy balloon is probably the worst example of that, although there are plenty, virtually no consequences whatsoever. Just absolutely despicable. Jim, I'm happy to report that you chose none of my options for this one. I also had two, so I'll mention each of them briefly. One came to us from the UN back in April. It was a report talking about areas where they advocated decriminalization, and these UN agencies advocated decriminalization of any sexual activity, including sexual relations between adults and minors, as long as it's consensual. So the new rule for some on the left is that as long as it's consensual, which it really can't be if a minor's involved, let's be honest, they were okay with that. Then they got the blowback, and all of a sudden these documents disappeared online. So they've at least tucked their tails, and they're going to wait for another time, I guess. But the fact that we know where they're coming from on that is truly horrific. And when you see how much some people want to incorporate that into the curriculum of the schools as well, it's not good at all. The other one, because I can't let her get away with this without mentioning her, is New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, who decided in the summertime that, just for a little while, because I'm very upset with these shootings that we're seeing around the country, I'm just going to unilaterally suspend your right to conceal and open carry. And that was so unpopular, thankfully, that even her own Democratic Attorney General said, I'm not enforcing that. You're going to have to do much better than that. She wanted to bypass the legislature, trying to do an end run on the Second Amendment. And again, the blowback made it a pretty limited attempt. But the fact that she would even try shows, again, where the mindset is of these people on the left. They want more and more power to take away your freedom. And they have more and more interest in expanding freedom in areas where it shouldn't be.
Two excellent selections there, Greg. And I think it says something about 2023 that both of us felt the need to bring more than one to the table.
Yes. It's
more than one bad idea to the table. Yes.
It's never a rebuilding year for the bad idea, sadly. All right, Jim, let's move away from good and bad ideas now to the boldest tactic of 2023. Who gets the gold there?
This is one where I felt the need to go with one that I did not agree with. I don't think it's good tactic, but I cannot dispute that it worked. Donald Trump's decision to not participate in the debates. As of this recording, there's no sign that it really hurt him in anything. Unsurprisingly, not exactly a furious denunciation from Ronna McDaniel over at the Republican National Committee. I was earlier this year, I was on Howard Kurtz's program, and the quote that they took and kind of used as a segment was my saying it was bad for democracy. I know you're well ahead. I think every candidate who wants their party's nomination should get up there on that stage and debate. And yeah, your other rivals are going to make attacks on you. They're going to criticize you. That's part of the process. That is, if you want to be president, you need to be willing to stand in front of people and say, here's why I'm the best choice. Here's what's wrong with my opponents. Here's why my agenda is the best. And we've seen Trump do this before. Trump is actually a pretty darn good debater when he wants to be. Or certainly a very entertaining debater, someone who kind of commands the stage. The logic was there, and I suppose it's possible if he'd been on a stage with Chris Christie, that Chris Christie could have, really gone after him the way he went after Marco Rubio in the 2016 presidential cycle. DeSantis, I'm sure, wishes he had some sort of moment where he could square off against Trump and kind of say, hey, you're the past, I'm the future. We've seen Nikki Haley be very good in a bunch of these debates. It might have been really interesting to see Mike Pence and Donald Trump talk to each other about what went right and what went wrong during their time in office. So I think the public would have been well served by that. However, there's no legal obligation to participate in these debates. The Republican National Committee, there was, not only did Trump not participate in debates, he often counter-programmed them with other events going on, usually near the debate site, kind of almost taunting the RNC that he didn't have to. There was no indication anybody at the RNC wanted to stand up to Trump or say, don't do this, or, if you're not taking this process seriously, we're going to dock you some delegates or something like that. But the RNC has that authority. They're just afraid to use it. So in the end, Donald Trump did not participate in the debates. There were a couple million people watching for each one of them, but the viewership was understandably lower without the front runner there. And many of us observed how it seemed kind of bizarre to watch a stage where often it would be, Christie, DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Haley, and maybe one or two others, and they'd all spend that time, going after each other. And then like 30 minutes in, Chris Christie would remind people, oh yeah, there's also this guy, Donald Trump, who's like 50 points ahead of us. And very little of the criticism was focused on him. So this worked out perfectly for Donald Trump. And there's no indication Republicans, or at least half the Republican Party, has any problem with Trump skipping the debates. It's a very bold tactic, and I think it worked exactly the way he hoped in 2023.
It was effective to the aspect that it hasn't hurt his numbers at all. I don't know that he necessarily lost any support. He clearly calculated that he had more to lose than to gain. And that was probably right, because he never had to take any direct slings and arrows from any of these people. Like you said, they ended up fighting with each other because even though they know he's the front runner, it's easier to talk about the person that's actually there. And so he pretty much skated through. The question in my mind, though, Jim, is whether he has set the precedent now that's actually going to work to his own detriment, because I'm sure he thinks he would come out on top of a debate against President Biden. And now maybe it's Joe Biden that determines, you know what, it's not in my interest. I have more to lose than to gain. So you know what?
Yes.
Come up with some excuse for why we can't do any general election debates. I would not be surprised if that happened.
I'm not going to dignify this process by getting on a stage with that clown, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I mean, that's very easy to imagine that happening.
Exactly. My choice is also one I did not agree with, but I think it was significant, and that is Matt Gaetz blowing up the speakership of Kevin McCarthy. When they installed McCarthy after whatever many ballots that was, somewhere in the teens back in January, there was the needing one member to move to vacate the chair to trigger a vote. And that's what he did following McCarthy's agreement to the continuing resolution at the end of the fiscal year to move things into November. And, well, he got 8 total Republicans to go along with all the Democrats who were just looking to create chaos in the Republican ranks, and they succeeded. But Gaetz, of course, not really having a follow-up plan. You can't tell me that he was like, oh, this is all going to work out so Mike Johnson becomes Speaker of the House. That was not what he intended, but he did intend to be a person who shook up the system, and to that extent, it was successful. The Republicans spent several weeks trying to recover from it. Did it make the caucus stronger? I think it's debatable. We'll see how things turn out in January when we finally get to this Congress actually deciding how things are going to get spent for the rest of the fiscal year. But in terms of shaking up the system and making his case heard, whatever you think of it, Matt Gaetz is my choice.
Greg, that's a really good choice. I think as of this recording, we can say it had, if not, well, it's conceivable in the long term it'll have okay effects or good effects for the Republican Party. It certainly put them through a really ill-timed 3 weeks of disorganized chaos as they were trying to figure out who they could unify behind. That was during the Hamas attack on Israel, when it really would have been nice to have the House to be able to come in session and say, we pass a resolution saying we support Israel. And, we'll see. Matt Gaetz reportedly wants to run for governor of Florida someday. We'll see if he jumps into that. And if he does so as a very popular figure or as a less popular figure. I think it's safe to say that he's made his share of enemies up on Capitol Hill. And I don't think you can say, oh, it's just because he's such a bold, iconoclastic, daring guy. I think he really stepped on some people's, like some people see him as an absolute troublemaker, self-promoting and ruining things for the rest of the party, but doing whatever, makes him look good. So we'll see how it shakes out for him and the party. Right now, things seem okay, but it seems like a lot, and of course, Kevin McCarthy is literally, after announcing he would never quit, has, announced he's quitting.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. And I think he's trying to become the Trump candidate in that 2026 Florida governor's race. It's going to be a while before Trump would weigh in on something like that, and don't know whether it'll actually make the difference. That all depends on who else gets in. There's names like Byron Donalds and some others who might get in the race as well. But long time from now, but the impact on the House this year was certainly significant. So, Jim, 4 down, 2 to go. Tomorrow we have a whole lot of fun with the media with our most underreported, most overreported, and our best stories of 2023. See you then.
Looking forward to it, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next year-end special of the Three Martini Lunch.